When I was 18, summer had just begun, and I was on break from school with no job to keep me occupied. Most of my time was spent indoors playing video games, watching YouTube, or just relaxing. At the time, my parents were out of town for a few days, leaving me home alone, which wasn't unusual. Sometimes I'd invite friends over, but that night I was enjoying the quiet. I was watching a rerun of one of my favorite shows on Netflix while scrolling through my phone. It was late, probably around 11 or 12, when I heard a knock at the front door. At first, it didn't register how odd it was to have a visitor so late. Fortunately, I paused before opening the door and looked through the peephole. Two men were standing there, dressed similarly, waiting. I hesitated, debating whether to let them know I was home, but decided to stay silent and watch. A moment later, one of them called out, "Hello, we're here to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Ian." I've changed the name for privacy. Hearing them mention my parents confused me. It was far too late for any legitimate visit, even if it was important. After exchanging a few words, the men left the porch. The outdoor lights were off, so I couldn't see where they went, but I noticed no cars or headlights, which made me wonder if they had walked in unsettling thought. I returned to the TV, but left it paused to stay alert. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps outside again. This time, they went to the side of the house. Alarmed, I ran to a back window and saw them entering the backyard through the fence. I quickly ducked out of sight, but heard them approach the back door. They talked briefly before attempting to force it open. I grabbed my phone and hid in the garage while calling the police. As I explained the situation, I heard a loud pop, the sound of the back door being forced open. Their footsteps echoed through the house as they went straight upstairs to the bedrooms. A door opened and closed, then silence. I hid in the garage, waiting tensely for the police to arrive. After what felt like an eternity, though it was only about 10 minutes, the police arrived. Their arrival prompted movement upstairs. I heard footsteps and muffled arguing. Officers entered through the back door and rushed upstairs, while another officer came to the garage and escorted me outside. The two men didn't resist arrest but refused to explain why they were there. Despite weeks of investigation, no clear motive was uncovered. They were only charged with breaking and entering. What still terrifies me is how specific their behavior seemed, as if they had been waiting for my parents to return. I often wonder if revealing myself earlier might have deterred them, but their strange demeanor and persistence suggest otherwise. If anything, I feel that staying hidden may have been the safest choice. I live on the outskirts of a mid-sized town in Wyoming. The main reason I chose to live here is because owning a large plot of land isn't as unattainable as it is in most other states. My house is small but cozy enough for living alone. This incident happened 4 years ago in the spring of 2019. We were enduring almost non-stop rain for weeks. It was a Sunday and I was home from work, spending the day watching TV and relaxing. Around 6 or 7 in the evening, I heard an unexpected knock at the door. The sound barely made it through the heavy rain. When I answered, I was surprised to see a stranger, someone who clearly wasn't a mailman or delivery driver. A random person showing up unannounced was unusual, especially since my property is far from the beaten path. "How can I help you?" I asked. The man, who looked to be in his late 20s, explained that he had been camping in the nearby woods, gotten into trouble, and needed a place to stay for the night. Given how isolated my house was, his story made sense. My home was the nearest shelter for at least 5 or 6 miles. The rain pouring down made me feel bad for him, but I couldn't ignore the potential danger of letting a stranger inside. I offered to let him use my phone to call for a ride into town, but he refused. When I told him he couldn't stay, he simply walked off. I watched him head down the dirt road before veering into the woods. It was odd, but I didn't dwell on it for long and went back to watching TV. 2 hours later, well into the night, I noticed an orange glow outside the window facing my backyard. Curious, I got up and moved the curtain. Through the rain and fog, I could see a small campfire flickering under a large tree in the woods. Next to it stood a figure holding something I couldn't identify. I couldn't tell if they were facing my house or the woods. Feeling uneasy, I closed the curtains and called the police. I explained the situation and hoped they'd arrive soon. While the person hadn't done anything to harm me yet, I wanted them gone before I went to bed. After hanging up with the dispatcher, I checked the window again. The fire was still there, but the figure was gone. That's when I heard footsteps approaching the house. Panicked, I ran to another window and saw him walking past, carrying a hunting rifle. He turned the corner and headed to my front door. Moments later, he banged on it several times, then fell silent. I grabbed my handgun from the hallway closet and hid behind a wall, my mind racing. He struck the door again, this time with the stock of his rifle, nearly breaking a panel. Realizing I needed to act before things escalated further, I aimed toward the door frame and fired a shot. The deafening sound echoed through the house, and for a moment I couldn't hear anything but the rain. When my hearing returned, the only sound was the downpour outside. After 5 tense minutes of silence, I gathered the courage to look through the peephole. The porch was empty, but footprints in the yard showed he had fled. The police arrived and conducted a thorough search. Near the campfire, they found a duffel bag partially buried in the dirt. Inside were items that investigators described as either a burglary kit or a murder kit, including tools and weapons. They concluded it had been hidden there in advance, possibly days earlier, with the intent to be retrieved later. The most chilling revelation was that this person had likely scouted my property at least once before that night. Why he targeted me specifically remains a mystery, and his identity and whereabouts are still unknown. I still live in the same house, but the events of that night haunt me. Every day I worry he might come back.
When I was growing up, I lived with my mum in a small house during my middle and high school years. She worked an overnight job, so I was usually alone from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. This happened a few months before I graduated high school on what started as a normal night. At around 7:30 p.m., I said goodbye to my mum like usual, then spent a few hours playing video games. It was a school night, so I couldn't stay up too late, but I still pushed it later than I should have. By 11:30, I shut everything off and went to my room to get in bed. However, I ended up scrolling on my phone for about another hour before finally falling asleep. At some point, I woke up to the sound of a door closing downstairs. Groggy, I glanced at the clock by my bed. It was 3:30 a.m. Assuming my mum had come home early from work, I turned over and tried to fall back asleep. I could hear footsteps moving around downstairs, but something felt off. Normally, my mum would come straight upstairs to get ready for bed. This time, it sounded like someone was walking slowly through the house, moving from room to room, as if they were exploring. After a minute or two, I started listening more carefully, and a nervous thought crept in. What if it wasn't my mum? I turned on the light in my room, and almost immediately, the footsteps stopped. The sudden silence made my heart race. I crept to my bedroom door and pressed my ear against it, but I couldn't hear anything anymore. Carefully, I opened the door and peeked into the hallway. The house was completely dark. Normally, if my mum was home, she would have turned on at least one light downstairs, which made the situation even more unsettling. I moved quietly down the hallway until I reached the top of the stairs. Kneeling down, I looked through the railing into the living room. The room was empty. Even in the darkness, I could tell that nothing had been disturbed. My PlayStation was still sitting where I'd left it. That little detail reassured me somewhat. If someone had broken in and walked through the whole house, surely they would have taken something valuable, like the PlayStation. Still, the unease lingered as I stayed crouched at the top of the stairs, listening for any further sound. I wanted to figure out if it was my mom walking around or if I was just imagining things. I went downstairs, calling out, "Mum, you home?" The house was silent. No response, no movement. I walked through the hallway into the kitchen, and immediately I noticed something. A shoe print on the tile floor. My eyes followed it, and across the room, I froze. Sitting at the dining table was a man wearing a dark mask and dressed entirely in black. The dim light made it hard to make out his features, but he was staring directly at me. He didn't move or say anything, just watched me with an expressionless look. Fear surged through me and I bolted back upstairs, locking myself in my room as I called 911. My voice trembled as I whispered to the operator, explaining what was happening. They assured me that officers were on their way, but my panic only grew when I heard the man moving. His slow footsteps crossed the downstairs floor, then approached the bottom of the staircase. I tried to stay quiet while speaking to the operator. Then I heard the front door creak open. Moments later, the man's footsteps faded into the night. Not even 30 seconds after that, I saw headlights sweeping through my window. My mum had just pulled into the driveway. I ran outside to meet her, frantically explaining what had just happened. She called the police again, and when they arrived, they did a thorough search of the house and property. They found no sign of the man or any clues to help identify him. What haunts me most is what the man's intentions might have been. He wasn't there to rob us, nothing was taken, and he didn't seem to have any interest in me. It's chilling to think he might have been waiting for my mum, timing his break-in for just before her usual arrival. I can't stop wondering what might have happened if I hadn't gone downstairs when I did, or if my mum had arrived just a minute earlier, unaware of the danger waiting for her inside.